It's great to be here today, so exciting, and I feel like an inspirational speaker with this headset on. I get to be free and walk around. It's a wonderful day, beautiful outside, and this space is the first time I've been here. It's so beautiful. So here to talk about a little bit about what we do at the Design Center and frame that in... We are a nonprofit organization. How many people have heard of the Nashville Civic Design Center? So a lot of you here. If you haven't, just a quick plug about us. If you boil down our mission, it's to help envision the future growth and development of Nashville. And we are located on 2nd Avenue. Please feel free to stop by anytime. Come to our programming, our monthly events. We do a lot of exciting projects, and all of that information is available on our website at civicdesigncenter.org. So enough about the plug. The topic today of ethics, I've decided to frame that in the context of civic design. And when I say civic design, my definition I'm using is the world that we inhabit on a daily basis. It could be when you wake up in the morning to where you go to work, and then that journey back home. It's wherever you may go, the world around us. And it's not just built environment, it's the open spaces too, and the streets. It's the lack of space too, and how we think about all of that. And then in the context of creating a healthier city for all, because that's also a part of our mission at the Design Center, is to make sure that we engage the community in the conversation about the places that we design so that they're a part of that process. Before I launch into this, I just want to talk a little bit about, in community development, there's a movement known as the Just City movement. And that is a focus on social justice as a part of community change. And how do we insert that conversation more as a counterpoint to a lot of the sort of ideology of neoliberalism, which was probably a focus of like the last 30 years of our culture, which is more on deregulation of government and more corporate profit, which inevitably has led to higher inequality. So the Just City movement is a focus on equity as a social change. Gotta remember to point this way for the clicker. Yeah? Get it? Okay. So this is an image of Nashville from the early 1900s, and what I love about this graphic is it shows what the city looked like. It's an aerial image before the introduction of the interstates, and it shows the layout of the city. You can kind of see all of the historic pikes converge in downtown, and so from a city planning standpoint, it really mimics a bicycle spoke. So all the wheels are going out, it's the spokes of a wheel, and you can see just how all of that converges on the downtown area. And then this is an image of the transportation lines in Nashville in 1927. So you could see as a city, we were very connected. We might not have been connected racially, equity-wise, but physically, people were living within very close confines to each other, and they had access to transportation to get around the city. Two major important federal-level things that happened in the development of cities all across the country. One was the introduction of the Federal Housing Act, which led to a lot of these housing developments and coined the phrase blighted or blight survey type communities. So it identified areas in cities that were considered blighted, and then it used the power of federal money to go in and make changes there. And in often cases, these were physically ill areas. They did not have access to infrastructure, to clean water, to sewer systems, so they did need improvements, but all too often they were used in other purposes to completely scrape the ground and remove people that were living in those areas. And so often they were targeted at racial inequality areas and low-income areas. And then the other thing that happened, sorry, I missed a slide. Yeah, is the Federal Highway Act. This is an illustration I found of some drawings from the interstate highway system. So look, we're here at Davidson County. There's an egg, which is basically Davidson County, showing all the lines, kind of how they're going to go through the city, and then people getting around and drawing those lines on the map of Nashville. And also, this kind of coincided in many ways with the Federal Housing Act, and it was used all too often to, the interstates ended up going to areas that had the least political powers to try to stop those initiatives. So inevitably, whether in many cities it was blatantly racist where those pathways were put, or oftentimes it was just the path of least resistance. The communities were not organized to try to stop those efforts. It's really hard to not point at the screen when you're clicking through. So I apologize for that. I'll be more patient. So again, this is an aerial photograph of Nashville pre-interstate. You can see here the beginnings of the bridge over the river, just starting to construct it, which would take on this pathway. But you can see all of the connections in the street grid, again, all coming into downtown in those weird grid patterns, but overall, essentially a connected community. And then the illustrations of how that would actually come into the city and be placed upon Nashville. And so what happened is you've almost built a wall around your downtown area, and then you've placed these giant barriers and obstacles to the different neighborhoods, and just literally cut the ties and the bonds of communities. Some more, blue sky illustrations of what this gorgeous interstate system was going to produce for us. More illustrations of this gleaming white city. In reality, this was the network and the streets that sort of existed. So while they may have needed improvements from an infrastructure standpoint, it was blocks of streets with sidewalks and connectivity. This is Capitol Hill. Again, this is the condition of the homes there, but still something that we'd all love to see today, right? This is the reality of what happened. All of that area was completely scraped clean. Hundreds of African-American residences were destroyed. Numerous black churches were taken down in that area, and actually the law prevented rebuilding of those businesses and housing in that area. This is an example of urban renewal. This is an old bank building that met its fate for the construction of, we're probably familiar with this bank tower in downtown now, which is the UBS Center. Again, another image of Capitol Hill. And the result was something that we're actually familiar with today, people being stuck in traffic on the freeway. So not a lot of change in getting that system. This is a view of what was there before. This is leading up to the War Memorial Building. Again, beautiful structures was torn down to produce this vision of what modern lifestyles would look like. Buildings with little character, little architectural significance, and often just windswept, blank plazas, no connectivity, no character really. So when I first started the Design Center, it was early 2000s. I was hired as a design assistant to come in and work on this project called the Plan of Nashville. And I think that this project was so important to the city because it was the first time that we really came together as a community, that the people that worked on this, to do a grassroots initiative for city visioning and city planning. And that involved hundreds of meetings, 50 community workshops and visioning sessions with areas, with urban neighborhoods all around the downtown core, to engage them in part of the conversation about what we wanted to see happen in Nashville. And here you'll see a picture of me, one of my I think this was my third public meeting ever. And aside to that, after my very first public meeting, I went home and cried. As anybody who's participated in the community meetings and conducting them, you've probably had that reaction too. But I learned a lot from that process and grew from it and really got connected to the communities and neighborhoods where we worked. We produced these beautiful drawings that reflected the ideas that we heard from the community. And as a result of that, in the Plan of Nashville, there's this 10 principles. I won't go into those, but you can look those up. They still serve as a guide to development in Nashville today. I love this image. This came from some of the workshops, and to me it illustrates a perfect point. This was talking about how do we build connectivity back to the riverfront, the interstate is what's dividing that in so many cases. And I think this is a metaphor for neighborhood groups as well that are divided by the interstate system as it exists. And the people from the neighborhood meetings, they talked about the river and the interstates. Those were the two things that we heard most from people. So in the book, we really do talk about that. This is I think a good graphic that shows, this is northeast Nashville, here's east Nashville, and you can see I-65 comes down, and then Ellington Parkway, and what it creates is this neighborhood. All these neighborhoods in here are really just completely closed off with very little access points around them. So what we started looking at as a vision is the radical idea of actually taking out the interstates and turning that central core into an urban boulevard setting where we either reknit the street grid, take it back to what it used to be, or you turn the interstate right-of-way into an urban boulevard that actually connects the communities that were separated. And then you can have areas for more public space and community spaces that get you to the riverfront. And then lots of amenities along the water that allow people to have physical activity and enjoy the views. I'm going to do a little case study on the Edgehill community, because that was actually the photographs you saw. That was the very first community I ever worked with. These are historic photographs from Edgehill that show the vibrancy and the activity that was in that community pre-urban renewal and pre-interstates. Here's some graphics that show the urban renewal process within Edgehill. So you can see the illustrations of, from a federal level, very bureaucratic, top-down approach to just placing a new street system, new housing over an existing community where the community was not consulted or a part of that process. These are figure grounds that showcase the grid here that existed, and you can see where the interstates went in. This is just looking over a series of decades. Sorry, this is an aerial photograph. The next one is a figure ground. And this highlights, I think, the most. You can see the early 1900s, the community was laid out, the streets were laid out, and then what you started getting was just infill of development. All those homes were put into the street grid. It had a really nice street grid here, and then you can start to see the blank areas where the interstate is, and then the development of large blocks of public housing. And also what that did is it concentrated poverty into really large areas, and then all the repercussions that have happened to that from a social standpoint. This was the vision of what we created with the community, essentially trying to go back in and rebuild that street system that it once existed. A finer grain of housing, which carried a whole range of housing typologies and housing cost and affordability, so you can have all types of different people with different incomes living in close proximity to each other. In a lot of ways, this is a precursor of some of the planning that's now been done looking at the Casey Place public housing development in East Nashville that I've also been able to participate. This is a quick snapshot of one of the very first tactical urbanism projects we participated in. This was in the mid-2000s. This was a school playground in Edgehill, and they came to us. This was the existing condition of the school playground. This is called Merle School, and it's kind of the last stop for kids before they get completely kicked out of the metro school system. And this is what they saw every day when they went outside. How inspired would you be if you walked outside and you saw this? Would that be a space you'd want to go play? No. It was hand-me-down equipment, and there was water standing there at any given time if it rained. So we worked with the school and with a Vanderbilt graduate student who kind of took this project on, and we did a quick design and had a community day. Got the students and the parents involved in the process and built this playground there. Just one example of a tactical urbanism type project. Got some artists involved in creating this mural, which needs refreshing. I went by there a few weeks ago just to see it. This major project that we've been working on at the Design Center is called Shaping the Healthy Community, the Nashville Plan, and this is kind of an extension of the ideas from the Plan of Nashville, but it's focusing on how to create a healthy community through urban design interventions to promote activity, to promote healthy living. Now, all too common, all too often, this is the physical environment that we kind of encounter on a daily basis. This is Madison's two older ladies that have to kind of encounter this journey to go and get their basic needs. Again, what about this makes you feel healthy or promotes activity other than being in a car? But even in a car, it's just an unpleasant place. There's actually somebody on a bike somewhere in that photograph, if you can find them. And then what we realized through our research is that health, bad health outcomes actually can be charted and graphed on a map. So this is a map of our census tracts, highest and lowest income census tracts, and then overlaid by dots that represent premature mortality rates within Davidson County. And so you can see a concentration of bad health within lower income census tracts. So we know that we can map this, and then we can target the hotspots in our communities that we can then go in and try to improve health in all ways, but our focus on health is through the built environment. It's one way to try to improve public health. There are other ways through individual behaviors and all of that, but the health field, the public health field, they saw that, if you look at the trends, which is so this is just showing the obesity rates and overweight rates for Tennessee and Davidson County. So we're really high up there. And obviously that's a national trend. So what's prompted this conversation is that these have just been going up and up and up. So public health really had no response to that and they're taking on all different tactics. So the built environment is one of those. So planning profession is working with public health again. So in our book, we have 6 different built environment factors that we have shown to impact public health, and we explore those through all of Davidson County, from our natural areas to our rural communities, our suburban, our urban, our centers, which is our commercial shopping districts, and our downtown. So we're looking at the entire county and giving recommendations and design strategies and policy recommendations on how we can design a healthier community. These are some of the areas that we've looked at. So back to the idea from the Plan of Nashville, which was to remove the interstates. We've showcased some areas that could start to heal the grid, a social justice type issue, I think, is how do you heal the interstate? You're probably not, even though we said let's take the interstates out, let's be honest, that probably is not going to happen, or it's going to be a really long time. But what kind of interventions can you do in the meantime that would help that problem? So here are some graphics for healing the interstates. Here are some other ideas for existing conditions. This is a pedestrian bridge that connects the Napier-Sudicum public housing to downtown. And when we first saw it, it looked like this. We said, oh, what can we do there? This was a design idea for changing that. And notice the placement of propaganda along the interstate. The stars aligned. TDOT got together with Public Works and MDHA and actually made this project happen. This is what it looks like today. It's one of those great success stories. The Cumberland River, what can we do about that? So our work has been focused on, clearly we've had a lot of progress from that aspect. We now have public spaces along the river, but we can do more. The water quality is clean enough to actually be swim in on if it's not after a storm. So we hosted a design competition that looked at the area on the east bank where the machine works are, the recycling facilities, and envisioned it as an active, healthy place that promotes physical activity, that promotes alternative sports, but also is sustainably developed. We're promoting an idea of creating a blueway in the water, so you could take out a kayak or canoe, float down to all these interest points along the way. You could hop out like at a bee cycle, put your kayak back in, go visit the community that you're in, hop back in the kayak, take it further down, hop on a bee cycle, and bike back to where you started. So that's all discussed in a lot of ways in our publication Designing Action. We're also responsible for the Parking Day event that happens every September. So this last year we had 50 parking spaces in the downtown area that were turned in public spaces for the day. We worked with Casa Azafran to Eric Hoke from our offices here. He produced these illustrations that took up old car lot next to their facility on Nolensville Road and envisioned what that could be. And this project's moving forward with the great leadership at Casa Azafran to turn this into reality. I'm a huge proponent now of cycling, but I don't cycle. But do you know why I don't cycle? Because I'm afraid to cycle, right? So there's been studies done that say 60% of the general population would consider cycling if they truly knew they were safe. So how can we make people feel safer to delineate the barriers between cars and cyclists? And a lot of times it's a very simple intervention that will help promote that. We have a wonderful group that we promote and work with, and it's a part of the Design Center called Turbo Nashville. And they're active, engaged citizens that are going out and making change happen, sometimes overnight or during the weekends, to make places better for our city that are often neglected. So this is an intersection in the Woodbine community. They went in on the weekend, cleaned it up, built a bench, a place for people to wait at the bus stop there. And that's Tactical Urbanism Organizers. And what's the website, Eric? TurboNashville.com. Check that out. I'm almost done. I know my time's close to being up. So another thing is engaging youth in the process. We did this wonderful project a few years ago called Design Your Neighborhood. And we worked with high school students in a focus of inner city communities to teach them and to explore what the impact of design is and how design, from all aspects of design, from urban design, from architecture, landscape architecture, graphic design, filmmaking. That was a 4-week-long summer camp. And it was a wonderful experience. I think this is probably one of the best projects I've ever been involved with. And now we're actually, a continuation of this is we've received funding to help to try to get the conversation about design and civic engagement into our school system. So we're working on a curriculum that will engage high school students over the next couple of years. Affordable housing, there's so much I haven't talked about. Obviously, public transit and affordable housing are so integral into all of these aspects that we can live here in our city and make it a wonderful place and continue to be a wonderful place. And several months ago, I had the opportunity it was my first exposure to CreativeMornings, and I had the opportunity to interview Manuel Zeitlin, and the theme of that day was action. So I would just encourage all of you, if you want to get involved, there's opportunities in places that you can, and to help create a better, healthier city for our city. Here is our wonderful staff. This this is current as of last summer, but please, I'm going to extend the invitation. Stop by the Design Center, come to one of our programs in the future, and there's my contact information if you have any questions. Thank you. Sweet.
Questions for sure.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
It's so badass. I'm so glad that there are people like you in the community that are working to make Nashville beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm interested in like what kind of like political backlash do you feel like you're receiving in regards to this stuff? Because the city seems so divided between like its politics towards business and its politics towards making the city beautiful. And how does that impact what you're doing?
Luckily, we experience very little political backlash from what we're dealing mostly on a Nashville-centric regional conversation, so we're not engaged, and we're also a nonprofit, so we're not trying to be political. We're trying to just engage the community in the conversation, so we've been lucky with that. And thank you for your comments. It's great to have a job that you love, and you know that you're having an impact in the cities. And I think this forum and this event is wonderful too, because bringing together everyone to have this conversation, this is something that I experienced when I first moved here. It was a different type of event, but it's what led me to be really excited about staying in Nashville and not wanting to move to another city. So I think if there's anybody here feeling that way, it's a good time to be in Nashville. Yes?
Federal and state grants and funding make it difficult or place limitations on these sorts of community aspects you're trying to develop?
Yeah, I think, obviously, if you follow the conversation about some of the transit challenges that Nashville's face, that certainly came into play, which kind of goes back to your question. But we actually have partners from both from financial standpoint, from both the city level and the state level and the federal level. So I think Nashville's lucky in this aspect. I've talked to a lot of other cities that don't receive the type of support that we do from those different agencies. So I think in that aspect we are fortunate here. Yes?
What are specific things that we could do as a creative community to like get involved and see like what are ways that we can actually help move all of this forward?
So I think there's so many different levels, like just going out to public, from the topmost level is just attending public meetings and making your voice heard when there's a plan. How to find those events? So on a grassroots level, we're always promoting community events, through our website. I think go to things like the planning department, which hosted the countywide Nashville Next process. I think their stats were something like 18,000 people participated in that, which doesn't sound like a lot when you think about the entire population of the city, but that was a super robust planning process from a national level. So there's that kind of, making sure your voice is heard in those processes. Getting involved with Turbo. If you have a smaller scale community group, when our book comes out, we're actually going to be going out and meeting with neighborhood groups, neighborhood associations. If you're involved in a professional organization or any type of meeting that you're involved with, we will come to your group and we'll present about a more extensive version of this presentation on the Shaping Healthy Communities part. And then our goal is to become technical assistants for community groups so that if you identified like that park area, that maybe that vacant lot, we would provide the assistance to visualizing what that could become. Because so many times, if you just show someone a visual of what something can be, that is the step that's needed to just make it happen. And the resources can be found. I'm a really optimistic person, so I approach things from if it's a good idea, there's a way to get it done. And so there's lots of other ways to engage, and that's kind of a follow-up question too. If you want to email me directly, I'll be happy to talk to you about that. Yes, and then here.
Why do you think that high school project is the best
Because that was a National Endowment for the Arts grant that we wrote, and it was our very first NEA grant, and it was just wonderful seeing the transformation, because we sort of hypothesized that design was a great thing. But our experiment was, let's take 12 teenagers and get them all in a room and go out and explore the city, and then give them some maps and let them envision a community, transforming a neighborhood. The Edmondson Park that's on Charlotte Avenue, we actually gave them that as a project to redesign. And then that project ended up happening, through working with the city and the Oasis Center and MDHA. And so then they were actually able to see something come to fruition that they had been a part of. This past summer, one of our interns that was in that photograph, she was the student in the picture that was holding the tomato and smelling it. So we took them to the farmer's market, and they had farmer's market bucks, and they were able to actually go around and shop for food. And for a lot of them, it was the first time to have many of these experiences. But just seeing that process of transformation and realizing that design and the conversation about design and design thinking can have such a huge, tremendous transformational impact on someone, to realizing that they can actually make a difference in their community and can create change, to me was just a hugely emotional and wonderful feeling. And so we wanted to try to replicate that, but we can't host a 4-week summer camp for just a small amount of students. That was an experiment. So we said, how can we broaden this out to the largest group possible? And that's where the idea of the educational curriculum came from. Yeah, here? Yeah.
Can you share your thoughts on the future of public transportation aside from cars,
Yeah.
subway or streetcar?
Right. We have to have all types of transit. So if another way to get engaged, the MTA just came out with their strategic vision that has several different options for what we can do. I'm a full supporter of the most ambitious, it's like $5.5 billion investment, but that is money that we need to spend. And everyone's voice needs to be a part of that process, because I think all too often, maybe it's the non-optimistic voices that get heard more than the positive ones. So it's not gonna be subway. It's just not, it's too expensive. The city is, not made for that. But it could be streetcar, it could be light rail, it could be bus rapid, it could be local bus, it could be commuter train, cars, autonomous vehicles are coming. We're already doing studies on this. We, not necessarily the design center, but the city. So it has to be a collection of everything. Just as housing, it's the same thing with housing. We have to focus on affordable housing, we have to focus on workforce, we have to focus not just on high end, but it has to be all spectrums of that.
One more?
One more. Sorry. Yeah.
What specific visions or projects make you most excited about the future?
So what I'm most excited about, I think it's because the very first project I worked on with the Plan of Nashville was focusing on the riverfront. And those projects just in the downtown have gotten underway, and they've been funded. They're not all complete yet, but they're in the pipeline. So my excitement is also the riverfront really does connect a lot of the county, because it kind of runs through the city like a ribbon. So let's look at the vision for more riverfront redevelopment and the connections to the neighborhoods and the communities that surround the area. I think that, aside from obviously public transit and the housing conversation, to me, and I hope that the Civic Design Center will be involved in helping continue that conversation and vision.
Thanks so much, Gary.
Yeah, thank you. Really great. Appreciate it.
Really great job.
Thank you.
Oh, you're going to want that.